Hey guys, today I am going to be painting these Devoli Ridgewalkers from Chronicle X. Now Chronicle X isn't quite out yet, but it is in late pledge status on Kickstarter, so if you are wanting these miniatures or if you're kind of curious about it, I'm going to link to that in the description below, both the Kickstarter page so you can read everything on offer and kind of how the campaign went and what people are saying about it, but then also to the late pledge link itself so that you can actually buy into this if you are still wanting to. Right here, I'm showing the finished product, actually, of one of them. There are three of them that I'm going to be painting, because the concept art in the game is more of a drawing outline of them, and so you kind of get to play around with the colors a lot more, which is a lot of fun, at least on my end. I really enjoy doing that. So, fully based, they're a unicast kind of technology. I'm going to get to that as I clean it up here. So now I'm back to the plain old boring, sad, lonely gray miniature here. And I'm going to be showing a lot of trimming here. Now, again, these are not production miniatures yet, right? This game is not out yet. They sent this to me early so I could paint some on the channel so that you guys can see how they paint up, because I think that's important. And it's too often that we can't see that, right? So you're kind of buying into these games on 3D models that are computer generated, unsure how the actual end product will be. And while this isn't a perfect solution, right, because it is an early model of it, so the casting isn't quite right and all that kind of stuff, which I'll get to in a bit. Ideally, with how these are made, they're made in, like I said, in this unicast technology where they aren't glued together, they're all one piece, right? This is all printed at the same time instead of pieces that are then glued together and then shipped to you after somebody actually glues it. So there was no glue to be seen anywhere here, but there was a lot more touch up on these early versions than production versions. So the guys over at Archon Studio actually sent me Vanguard of War as well, so I was able to compare both these Ridgewalkers to the other prototypes as well as to their actual production. So you see right there that big piece of plastic, right? I did not see that in any production miniature that they sent me, so I'm going to show you those kind of at the end. Just note that I'm going to have a little bit of a harder time here. I'm going to show you what I did, so not hiding anything. This is what I received. But I'll then show you kind of where it'll be at the end. So what's important here is design, quality of the sculpt when it comes to details and how well those show up, and then just kind of overall how the definitions show up and how they're painted. Okay, so I'm not going to show you the third one. It's about the same as the last two. Here is another prototype that they sent me here. You can see a little bit on the cape there. This is just another one. So I'm just trying to look here. Anything I might see that might be of issue. That was really it. There wouldn't be a lot of cleanup there. Here's the Annihilator. I can't wait to paint him. I'm going to be painting him next, so don't you worry about that. He's going to be cool. So just kind of looking through here. He's a big miniature, by the way. And I must say, I love their bases. That's really cool. I can see a few points of maybe a little bit of touch up, but these seem not too bad either. It was really the first ones I picked. So I asked my patrons who they wanted to have painted first, and I'm going to be focusing on the sculpt with his claw up, mainly because I wanted to pick one, so it's not a whole lot of thrashing between the three while I'm painting, and because that's what my patrons wanted me to paint the most, so that's what I'll do. Here's Pentagon. He's great too. He's got a little bit on the back of his leg. I'm about to point that out right there. There you go. A little bit there. Otherwise, just fine. And then lastly, here is a miniature, production miniature from Vanguard of War. This is what you got if you backed the game. So, as you can see, the side back there is cleaned up a lot. I might touch that up a tiny bit, but I bet painting would be fine. A little tiny piece there in the corner. But otherwise, I'm not seeing anything close to what I dealt with these kind of early versions. So just kind of keep that in mind. A little bit right there in the base, you can tell. So you can see it's cleaned up a bit more before it gets to you. Here's another one from Vanguard of War. Again, I just randomly picked these two. I think they're both from the Stretch Gold box because the Kickstarter exclusive boxes. So a little bit back there on the cape, right on where the skull. Well, that's not a cape. I don't know. I don't know what's going on with these miniatures, and a tiny bit there on the base I'd have to trim off with a knife. But yeah, that's it. No mold lines anywhere that I could see. So right here I have some liquid green stuff. Now, as I said, one of the miniatures, this one here specifically, you could tell when it was printed. I don't know if it was shifted or if it moved or what, but it misaligned where this leg was. So I just kind of fill up with green stuff. And then I decided what I'm going to do is I'm going to paint it dark. So it's going to be a dark boot with dark skin. And therefore you won't really be able to tell the difference. So I'm priming it in gray. Didn't come primed, so now this is primed gray. Spray primed everything, and we're starting with Necromancer Cloak. Okay, so sorry for the long introduction, but let's actually get into it now. So this is actually painting it, and I'm going to be starting with the base and essentially painting up. So there's going to be a lot of time spent on these bases because they're completely done. You do not have to base these at all. In fact, one thing I found interesting is the base is actually really thin. If you notice, it's quite thin, and then they build up on it, right? And so they stand about the normal height that you would think when it comes to the scale, right? So they fit in really well, but because of all this basing on it, the bases are just really skinny in certain portions. So you see where they have that other bit, it just went up there. But anyway, I'm going to start with this really dark gray. I'm not going to paint this shiny metal. You could just paint this a metallic, in which case pick a dark metallic like lead belch or something like that and go to town, or even like pig iron or you know, just a really dark metal, and then you can lighten it up. I'm actually going to do it in gray and then do a heavy dry brush in spots and a light dry brush elsewhere to kind of give it a little bit of a sheen. Alright, so now ash gray, this is for this chain on this other miniature, so this is a different sculpt. I'm going to show you each individual unique piece, right? So I didn't show you the Necromancer Cloak on all of them, they're all the same. But this chain is unique to this one, so I'm going to add a little bit of ash gray here. If I did this again, I would either highlight the chain up more. I'm going to put it in the inside there, and then on these kind of screw bolts or whatever's, you know, bolting that down to the ground. Or maybe I would have actually done metal on the chain. It's debatable. Okay, so now there's this torso. I apologize a little bit for the blurriness here. I'm using tanned flesh on this one. Again, I'm wanting to challenge myself with different color hues, right? Instead of the very bright Caucasian color that I typically do. So this is going to be a much, you know, a much more tanned person here. So this is, so this is the tanned flesh. I'm just going to cover the whole miniature. I'm going to go off screen a few times here. I'm going to try and avoid that in editing. So apologies for that. But maybe a little too zoomed in on this, and I was trying to fit all three miniatures in the shot. Let me know if maybe that wasn't worth it to you and you just like to see me just kind of paint this single one. First time doing that, so some slight growing pains there. But as you can see, paints up really easy. All the lines are super defined. Now that that's dry, I'm getting the Reikland Flesh tone. It's a much more red, light brown that I'm doing here. I guess a medium brown. You can go a lot lighter than this. But with some red hues in there. And then I'm getting the oak brown. I'm going to paint this leg the exact same color that I painted the SWAT rifle miniature from Batman, the miniature game, or Batman Gotham City Chronicles. So if you've seen that, you know exactly what I want to do here. For the boot, I'm going to do the Rhinox hide. Again, I'm wanting to paint this quite dark, so that I didn't even clean up my green stuff. So it's just kind of how it laid. It ended up fine, and it's okay. Originally, I was going to paint the laces, but I decided against that because, again, it would have brought attention to it. Okay, so I have tan flesh back out. Again, we're moving really quick here, and this is to bring back that base color from the wash. So this will be one separation between the shadows with the wash and then the regular base color. If you went in with the highlighted, it would be a very stark contrast here. So I'm painting in pretty much all of the raised portion, you know, 90% of the miniature is being painted back. But as you can see, it just leaves that subtle difference, which is really, really nice here. And I really like it. I think that torso came out great, by the way, at the end. I don't know if you noticed it or not, but it's pretty good. Okay. So this white here just signifies that I've now added a little bit of white for my first highlight. And I'm going to paint another 80% on top of that 90%. So still most of the highlights here. There are some raised portions I don't do at all around the neck where I feel it would still be kind of shadowed. And I'm really just kind of tracing the muscles. Alright, next up I'm adding even more whites. This is the second level highlight. This is as high as I'm going to go, and this is just kind of, not necessarily an edge highlight, but a fairly extreme highlight, so just on even less pieces and even smaller percentages of the surface area here. Also, this guy is ripped. I mean, he's in both senses of the word. He's very, very muscular, and he's also been ripped apart, so there's my joke. Okay, so I'm coming in with chocolate brown to get in those highlights on the leg, but this is all I'm doing. I'm not doing a wash on it. I'm not really spending a whole lot of time on this. You could have done a wash and then highlighted up the chocolate brown again, but I found that just adding a tiny bit here, the colors are close enough to where I think they blend in pretty well, and give some good definition to that leg. Next up is Abaddon Black for the sole of the boot. Again, it is highly textured and detailed, which is nice because you can actually see it pretty well here when it's laying on its side severed here. So be sure to paint that. And now we're down to Nuln Oil. Again, I'm being pretty careful here. You don't need a whole lot like I do on some of my textured bases because the texture is not super raised up. And then you don't have it pooled up everywhere either, which is nice. The only thing I didn't paint yet is the blood, the guts, and the bones on the miniatures. The reason I didn't do the guts yet is because I just haven't done it yet. I'm going to reuse one of the colors on the miniature, so I want it to be the last thing I do on the base, besides the bone, which is another part of the miniature, and I'm trying to, use the paints at the same time if I can help it. Just throw it all over that chain, by the way. Give it some definition there. Okay, so now we're down to Agrax Earthshade. So I wanted the raised portion on each base of the metal to be slightly different, to look different. And so instead of Nuln Oil, I'm using Agrax Earthshade on this dark gray. It's a dark gray, and that's going to be the predominant color. This just changes it ever so slightly. You can even see it when it's wet there. The brown just gives it a little bit more of a dirty look, and just really adds some definition, I think, to the base. I would highly suggest if you have the brown wash of any kind, go and throw it on there. Now I'm adding a little bit more Nuln Oil in the middle there, in that kind of grate. I think that it pops out those details really nicely. I don't even bother highlighting that up. Okay, so we have Necromancer Cloak back out, and this is just to quickly highlight back up what we just used that Agrax Earthshade on. So I'm just going to only use it on the raised portions here. I'm not worried about adding it to that bottom portion where we did the Nuln Oil, so this is just Agrax Earthshade highlighting. Okay, so now I have Uniform Gray out, and now this is my kind of dry brush on that Nuln Oiled portion, right? That kind of metal plating. And as you can see, with how dry brushing works, when you have it a little bit heavier, first of all, you can control how hard you press down, which will affect how much paint you get on it. Second of all, typically the first 1 to 2 brush strokes are going to be a little bit heavier, unless you properly get it off. So I have it a little bit heavy here, and then I just purposely make some deliberate heavy-handed dry brushing to get it on the grate, and I think it adds a nice kind of faux shine to it that I think works really well. I wouldn't call this non-metallic metal. Maybe it is, I don't know. It's not what you would think when you're looking up for like a tutorial or something like that. Alright, next up we get to the fun color. So here's Emperor's Children. A great name to a great color here. This is very bright pink. I'm going to be covering this in a blood effect, and it's going to darken it up, and I'm going to even add a wash to it just in case I don't cover all of it. So this is a very bright color, but this is for kind of the muscle that you see. Additionally, on this miniature, the organs are pulled out, right? And so I paint a lot of it in that pink. I kind of skipped that a little bit. So then I'm taking this Grimoire Purple, and I'm getting both this long intestine that's been pulled out, as well as just some other little bits in that torso that just so it's not all pink, so it's pink and purple splotches kind of everywhere. It looks like it just mixed up innards, more or less. And again, this is pretty much just a base coat. I'm going to cover it in a wash, and then I'm going to add technical paints to it on top of that. Okay, so this is why I waited, because while I have the Grimoire Purple out, I'm going to go ahead and they have these kind of, on the backs of their legs, it looks like they have these almost exposed parts. It's about 3 levels deep. And so I wanted it to, I don't know, I wanted it to both add a splash of color, as well as just kind of differentiate that portion. Now, there are a lot of different sections of the body, and we're about to get into it a lot. I also added on the inner neck part there. Again, just add a little bit onto the front as well. Just those slight little differences. They don't really notice them necessarily straight up, but it gives an overall feeling of a bit more complexity. Here's that wash I talked about. Just Nuln Oil, just plop it on there. Pretty haphazardly. It's nothing too bad. You're not going to hurt anything with this Nuln Oil. But anyway, their body has a lot of different layers, and you could do different colors for each one. I'm not going to. It's pretty much all going to be the same thing. So this is just highlighting up, again, just with the base color, bringing it back up to that color, and I'm just painting in the top 80%, leaving a heavy shadow in those recesses at the top there, so that it looks like, you know, it gives it more sense of a depth. Alright, adding a little bit of white, so I'm doing an extreme highlight. This is not quite an edge highlight. I'm doing about, I don't know, 40% of it. So there's a little bit of transition between the two. This is actually the color I kind of wanted. I want it pretty bright, or at least, you know, brighter than Tessins are going to end up, because they weren't highlighted at all. Okay, and Deathclaw Brown. So we are finally getting to painting the miniature. It's going to start looking a lot more painted now. Those bases do take a while because they are so detailed, and each one's different. There is no repeated basing here. Every single miniature has a different base, which is, you know, cool, and they all kind of fit together too. In this case, these guys have all recently been through some humans, it seems, and are ready for more. So deciding where to stop and start this armor, like I kind of hinted at before, that is completely up to you. You can decide how to do it. So anyway, you just kind of have to pick and choose where you want different colors to be. So I'm going to be using a lot of grays, as you saw, and just different levels of grays, getting really dark or pretty bright as kind of armor pieces. But that's going to be in stark contrast to this kind of brighter color alien. Keep in mind, though, that this is a Devoli Ridgewalker, and there is there are a few different Devolis, different aliens of different kinds, but one of them is like this giant beast guy, which again to me looks more, you know, earthy or primal, as opposed to kind of the typical Martian aliens that these are kind of based off of otherwise. So that's a good, you know, pick for this color, and again, it's going to really pop out from the gray aliens or the green aliens or whatever you decide to end up painting them. So I quite like it, so I stuck with it. Mostly it's these big armor pieces that end up coming off of his skin that I'm not painting. So there's some on his legs and on his arms, and then on his torso he's got like this different kind of rib cagey kind of armor, and then on the back he's got these huge spikes. So other than that, I'm painting right over the eyes, by the way. I also, at this time, do not paint his bottom jaw. I end up doing that later, off camera. I would suggest you go ahead and do it now. Now, here in the back of the head, where the hair is kind of sculpted in a unique way, to where you just kind of have to decide when it ends and when it doesn't. I think you could get away with having some of this gray, and perhaps even some of them part of his skin color here. So just keep that in mind. This arm here, by the way, is up, twisted, and so you're seeing the underside in the front there. Okay, so now we are on Rakarth Flesh, and this is going to be the base color for the hair. So I'm just going to paint this up real quick. Again, kind of staying in these very, earthy kind of tones here, which is kind of interesting, especially for an alien. Makes him pretty unique, I think. The lines, by the way, here between where the hair is and where his skin is, very defined, super easy. You don't have to draw it on. There's no guesswork. All the details there. So super easy. But again, when you get back here, because of those spikes that are coming out, you have to just kind of look to see if there are any ridges. And if it doesn't have these ridges, then it's part of the hair. So just have that be your guide here. Alright, next up is Seraphim Sepia, and this is going over all the Deathclaw Brown as well as the hair, so just cover everything you've painted on the alien miniature itself. Alright, now again, getting the Deathclaw Brown back out, we are going to highlight up all of those muscles, all of those armor plates that we're seeing. I'm starting in kind of the little tiny points there because it'd be really easy to fix if I need to, because it's separate from the rest of the body, so there'd be no blending or anything like that. But once I'm happy with what's on my brush and I'm comfortable with it, I move on to the leg and just kind of go around the body and make sure to get the feet and whatnot, and you're just going to highlight it back up to that base color except for all the ridges. Also note, I do not do a whole lot of work inside of the tail. I'm not worried about spending that much time on this miniature, so there's not going to be a huge amount of highlighting on the insides of the tail that I ended up painting. Alright, so here's the Agrax Flesh. We're going to do the same thing. We're just bringing it back up to that, though I am going to keep a little bit of a heavier shadow on this just to give it some definition and to make it seem like they're much more separated. Alright, so then I'm going to take some black gray here and I'm going to start painting the bigger portions here. But first I want to show you something really fun that I noticed with these small bases. So if you put too much pressure on these, they tend to pop out. Just like that. The Citadel holder, and then you smash your other miniature and it's a mess and you keep recording anyway, and then you put it in the video because, you know, stuff happens and you need to know I'm not perfect. Though you knew that just by looking at my paintings, I'm sure. Anyway, yeah, they're really skinny bases. So the Citadel hobby holder, I think it's called, doesn't hold this hobby version quite so well. So you're gonna have to hold it by hand. Anyway, these really, this is for everything except the tail ridges, which I debated on which one to do. And the chest armor. Everything else is going to be in this black gray. These kind of spiky bits that are coming off of him is kind of how I judged that. So on the arms and legs as well, I'm painting these. I'm not painting the claws or the jaw pincher claw things. That's going to be a totally separate color from either of them. But again, I'm using this smaller brush. In fact, this is actually a 000 Winsor & Newton. So I believe I've mentioned this before in a previous video, but thanks to the Patreon supporters, I was able to purchase these to try them out. What I hope to do is use them enough and enough of these videos to where I can formulate a solid opinion on whether or not they are worth the upgrade and worth the money. I am assuming proper care, at least to my level, which is typically, and I mean like, 95% of the time, cleaning them after a painting session with actual brush soap. Anyway, they so far, at least right here, it's keeping a great tip, and I could have probably done this with the one. My worry, especially in the back of the hair, was a bit of a bigger belly. It gets a good tip, but the tip then goes to a big belly of the brush where it holds more of the paint. And I was worried that would brush against something. So I'm using a bit of a smaller one here just because of the finicky detail and because I'm trying to use them all. So this is a 000 there. But as you can see, super easy, again, everything's well defined. You're not having to fake any lines. You're not having to draw on anything. Nothing's freehand here. Just simply painting what's left gray on those spiky bits. Okay, so now for the other gray. So this is uniform gray again. First of all, we get to reuse a color. That's awesome. Second of all, it's a pretty good light gray color, especially when you darken it with some Nuln Oil. There's a spoiler for what's to come. So this is kind of for his, I don't want to call it a rib cage, though it is kind of rib cagey. Really, and I thought about almost making this exposed bone. I think that'd look really cool maybe and really sick and nasty. But I wanted his claws and jawbone, which I am going to paint in that bone color, to really stand out. I wanted it to be a kind of a cool feature, especially at the ends of his hands, because they're all claw, to be kind of this brighter color that makes it stand out a bit more. So I chose against it. So instead, this is going to be just gray here. But again, super easy to do. When it gets towards wrapping around his arms, just kind of be careful. but I didn't, in none of the sculpts, all 3 of the sculpts were really easy to paint here. You just kind of have to take your time. Now, when going along this this tail, again, it's fairly easy, though you might actually miss something, especially on this miniature because of how the tail is wrapped. In fact, I think if you watch closely enough, I am going to forget one of the spots, and I'll have to paint that up later. So in this one, there are 3 separate ridges you have to paint, and they kind of do this loop-de-loop here, and you got to make sure to do the tops and bottoms of them so you kind of cover it all. One of the more time-consuming portions of the miniature, actually, about as much as the body itself. Okay, so now we have the Nuln Oil out as promised, and we're just going to throw it on everything we just painted in that uniform gray. By the way, with these washes, I'm not using my Winsor & Newtons. I am using a older regiment brush. This is a regiment brush that I replaced with a newer one here. Again, I don't need a super fine tip here. And so I don't care quite as much if it gets covered in the Nuln Oil, because Citadel wash our pots, I typically end up getting that wash all on the bristles, not just on the tips and in the belly, but all the way to the ferrule. So may as well use a brush I don't care as much about. Okay, so as always, going back to the base color, so I'm getting uniform gray, but I am using this as a bit more of an edge highlight, so I'm not painting in nearly as much. As you can see, just kind of simple portions here. Just it's enough of a drastic change because the Nuln Oil is so dark compared to the super light gray that I was using. It works really well, but this is watered down enough to blend quite well. It's not a super drastic change, and I think a little bit of a tiny bit of a drastic change looks really slick here. So this is pretty much all I'm doing here, and I think it ends up really well. So we are adding white straight up to the black gray here, and that's because the black gray to Nuln Oil is very close, so it didn't darken it all that much. So if I just add the black gray, it's gonna barely show up. And so I'm adding some white to it, and that'll really kind of bring out that difference that I'm wanting here. And because it's so sharp and the points and the elevation between them, I want some heavy highlights to really add the definition to the ridges. Okay, next up is Cavalry Brown, one of my favorite colors. I really enjoy this one because it's a dark red. I'm painting the gum line. Yes, there is a gum line here. It's actually easy to paint, and it is defined as well. Very impressed. That alone should tell you the detail over here. I'm also painting the inside of each mouth. Well, okay, 2 of the mouths. One of them's closed, so I don't paint that one. Okay, following up, we're getting some dragon red, and this is for the eye. Now, I'm painting the entire eye socket. So the eye is a raised eye, which is always helpful. However, I want to use 3 different reds here. Well, 2 reds and an orange. So this one is going to paint the entire socket. Okay, now we're going to move on to Drake Tooth. The Drake Tooth is my chosen poison bone color for the claws. It'll also go on the skulls and the bone bits that you see on the bodies and the teeth. So get those teeth, get those claws, get those jaw bones. The end of the tail, I also decided to do bone. I think it just kind of, these kind of color changes add a whole lot. So I'm not using a whole lot of colors in this. If you've noticed, I've tried to reuse a whole bunch, but I'm changing it up enough to where it looks more realistic. Rarely in life are there exact color matches between different things, and so this kind of helps with that. Oh, and also get those little claws down there too. A little finicky, take your time on that portion. Okay, following up with Seraphim Sepia, this is going to be the wash on top of all these bones. I pretty much always use Seraphim Sepia for a bone wash, regardless of the bone color I use even. I think it's a really good color for that. And then we're getting Drake Tooth out again to again bring up the color. I'm not going to highlight past that, that's plenty bright, but I did want a brighter. Normally I use Screaming Skull from Citadel, so this Drake Tooth is a much more, a little bit more white in there, and I kind of like that. It's a little bit more of a drier looking bone. But again, all the claws, the jaw bones, everything, just kind of bring out the raised portions and leave those recesses in the wash. Okay, so now we have light orange. I did not film that I used pure red on that raised portion, and so this light orange now is on that pure red, and I'm just adding a dot towards the front of each eye. Again, just a little dot, just like that, done. That's it. Looks great. Okay, so now I have werewolf fur, and you can see that down below. I forgot the hair of that head that he's standing on. So we're going to go ahead and paint that in with this kind of a plain old brown color. I flip-flopped on what to paint it and painted it brown instead. And now Agrax Earthshade, just add the definition there. I'm not going to bother dry brushing it. It's a head being stepped on, it's not the focal point. And look at that, matte varnishing, but we're not done yet. It's important. So matte varnish first, and then get the blood for the blood god, or any kind of fresh blood color, whether it's Vallejo that does it or whatever. It's this really nasty tentacle paint. It has a shine to it and a goopiness to it, and the matte varnish will ruin that, and it'll look like you just painted red. Which is not what you want. So you matte varnish first, and then you add this. Also, and I've spoken with other painters about this, and painting this technical paint on after the varnish, it does not need a varnish afterwards. It actually hardens really good and stays on the plastic really good. It won't really chip off unless you're really working at it. I will note that as you saw, there is some plastic model to the miniature for the blood, right? It's raised up in this goopy form, but it's a very exact goop that I'm not happy with when it comes to the tentacle, which can make it look a lot more realistic with splatter and all that. Notice, by the way, I did not cover all of the muscle, about 80-90% of it, and then I'm having it drip down on the sides. That's just a fun thing to do. It doesn't quite make sense, because it shouldn't actually be on a round base, but again, it's fun to do and it looks cool. Anyway, I did paint beyond that, but that gray, because I didn't paint it red beforehand, needed 2 coats of this. So I did end up adding more. I think that's fine anyway, because it just makes it look more gloopy and globby. But feel free to do as much or as little blood as you wish. People have very different tastes on how much blood you should have. I would suggest starting small, and then as you see it, adding more as you wish. It's very hard to take away this technical paint. So what you end up with is what you have. Now, he has this kind of dead guy down there. So what does he need? He needs to show that he obviously did it. And this hand's raised up, so it's going to be kind of draining down. I even add a little bit on the base, like it dripped off of him onto the floor as well. So again, just really nastying him up. This splash of color, by the way, is awesome. It's fantastic and adds a lot to these miniatures. I mean, a lot. Like, I'm really glad this was here, or I wouldn't have done this, but it works really well. So yeah, you just kind of go crazy with it. Have fun with it, right? Just do whatever you want. These kind of technical paints are always a joy to use anyway. So the third one does not have any body parts. So I made it to where he ate somebody. So I'm going to end up putting the blood on his jawbones and in his mouth. So that's why he has such a clean base. Alright, and here is the final roundabout for all of these miniatures. Here's all 3 of them painted up. These guys took quite some time. It was actually a lot of work because they're so detailed. And they're each in a different pose with different, bases, so there's different unique parts on them, and really just a lot of effort went into them, but I think it plays out super well and is super worth it. As you can see, I think they look fantastic. I'm really happy with how they turned out. So anyway, guys, thanks so much for watching. Again, if you aren't interested in Chronicle X, that's what these miniatures are for. This is a preview for that. It's not out yet. It's still in late pledge. You can get it now. It's not too late. Check those links in the description below. Additionally, I would like to thank all of my patrons. Here you can see them listed now. Thank you so much for your support, both the ones listed and just everybody that views and comments and supports and has kind words. It really is just part of this growing channel and growing community. Thank you so much. Always appreciate it. And I will talk to you soon.